Hello, BookTube. I saw an article online this morning about the demise of Barnes& Noble, the massive retail book-selling chain here in America. It has over 600 stores. Uh, it's not the first article of that on that subject. This one had, I think it was from the Wharton School of Business. They asked a whole bunch of experts to weigh in, and the experts were talking about the whys and wherefores of this premature post-mortem, that yes, the company is doomed, but here's why. Because it didn't adapt, because it sank all sorts of resources into things that didn't work, because it didn't make any kind of a connection with the audience that could keep it alive, whose loyalty could keep it alive. One person in the article talked about Barnes & Noble as a kind of a public library that serves coffee. And there were some ideas floated about ways to save the retail chain, maybe either bring in more concession sellers. Right now, Starbucks takes a concession to sell coffee on Barnes & Noble premises. What if you did more than that? What if you had a bakery, a Shishi bakery in the back there somewhere, or who knows what else? Or maybe diversify the stock so that it's not just books and CDs and movies, but very much more of the sort of frou-frou add-ons or other items that might go along with books, like furniture, for instance, a reading desk or lamps or stuff like that. And other experts were saying, no, the way to go is to get rid of all of that. You get rid of these cavernous, gigantic stores and downsize them and return to your roots. Do just books. And I read it all with fascination, of course, because I was a Barnes & Noble bookseller for a quarter of a century. And I left Barnes & Noble with a kind of pang in my heart. I had reduced my schedule. By that point, I was writing all the time, freelance. So by that point, I had reduced my schedule to just a couple of 4-hour shifts a week. And I was at the registers at my own request, because my previous stomping ground I've worked at two Barnes & Nobles. One, a big, busy store in the middle of downtown Boston that closed. And then another in a mall further out from the heart of Boston that was still big, but it was a completely different tenor, completely different kind of store, completely different clientele of customers. And it didn't take me long there to realize that the thing that I most prized at working retail bookstores was to be constantly busy with customers. I don't like busy work. I don't like, some middle manager 20-something ordering me to build some sort of display and then telling me that I'm doing it wrong or anything like that. I didn't want to do anything like that. Instead, I wanted just to help customers and talk about books. And I realized quickly at the new location that the place where I would be doing that, where I would get a constant stream of customers, would be the registers. So I learned how to do the registers. I'd never been allowed anywhere near the registers in my old store. I learned how to do it. It wasn't that hard. It turns out the machine does a lot of the work for you. But at the end, even though I loved talking to the customers and I loved the Christmas rush and I loved sharing recommendations and whatnot, at the end, when I wasn't helping customers, when there was a dull spot, when there was a stretch where I wasn't doing anything, and even when I was helping customers up at the registers, I would be standing there and I would realize, I'm actually losing money to stand here. If I take what I could be earning on my couch with my girls against what I'm earning now, and then factor in the fact that I can't be working on my freelance work while I'm here, this is actually costing me money. And even then, out of sheer momentum, because I loved the old Barnes & Noble so much, I stuck around for months and months. I had those external factors working on me. The one is that I effectively had another living, that the Barnes & Noble was no longer any kind of competition to. Not financially, I mean personally. It wasn't, in terms of interest, it was no longer any competition. And also, my girls were getting older. And I was starting to feel a little bit put upon leaving them at all. Because a 4-hour work shift in the middle of a day means you're gone for 6 hours. That's just the way it is. You can't just fall out of bed and land at your station. So I eventually left. I eventually just wrote out that letter that you never think you're going to write when you're at a workplace for that long. I wrote out a 2-sentence letter saying that I would be leaving in 2 weeks. And it wasn't until a year after I left that friends of mine who were still at the store and at other Barnes & Nobles across the country started to tell me that some of the worst aspects of the store's management policies that existed when I was there were getting incalculably worse, incalculably faster than anyone had predicted. Whereas I had more than one person who didn't know each other make identical references to The Lord of the Flies. And one of the biggest of those gestures was made just a few months ago, I think, or half a year ago, when the company decided to cut all of its most experienced employees, the ones who'd been there the longest, because they were the most expensive employees. Still not expensive in terms of the workforce, still not expensive in terms of what they did for the store, but expensive in terms of retail. The company decided to cut them all, and to eliminate a lot of intermediary, quasi-managerial positions where authority could collect that didn't require the intervention of a manager. Those are very important, very helpful things for customers, to have someone on the sales floor who can authorize a return, who can expedite a sale of some kind or other. And those positions were done away with. The people were farmed out to the cafes, and the experienced booksellers, plenty of them in every aspect of the store, from the information desk to the registers to receiving, were just told, today's your last day of work, so long. And there were pieces written in Publishers Weekly and elsewhere about what that says about a company. If that's what they're willing to sacrifice, as opposed to sacrificing other things, like, for instance, that the district managers for Barnes & Noble are fated to a gigantic annual, they call it a work session, a conference. But it's usually somewhere tropical, and it's usually characterized by quite a bit of swag and revelry. The reports that I've had about those manager meetings are, of course, astronomically expensive. Those district managers from Hawaii and Alaska and Montana are not asked to pay their own airfare, and a million other things like that. But I learned only after I left Barnes & Noble that Barnes & Noble was changing its work environment to the point where I know I would have left anyway. And that was kind of weird to feel, especially when at our old store, before Barnes & Noble really concentrated on being a quote-unquote superstore, before Barnes & Noble was selling tchotchkes, before Barnes & Noble was selling coffee, before Barnes & Noble was doing anything like that, when it was concentrating on high-volume book sales to bookish customers, at the old store in the heart of downtown Boston, boy, did we have fun. Boy, oh boy, did we have fun. Of course, there were the usual workplace frictions, but boy, oh boy, did we have fun. Find somebody from those years who was on that crew with me and ask them about it, and their face will change. And I was thinking about this when I was reading this article, because all of the experts in the article and the writer of the article were all just taking as assumed that Barnes & Noble as a retail chain is doomed. A couple of the experts were saying it'll happen in a year or two. And the assumption on everybody's part was that the reason for it was that Barnes & Noble no longer connects in any useful way. It no longer makes things easier. That's a business school metric. Does it make things easier? Does it make, X, Y, or Z function easier? And it doesn't. It's much easier to shop for a book online and get it shipped right to you, often for a much lower price. And all of us thought this at the time, years ago, when these clouds were only on the distant horizon. We used to talk about this at my old Barnes & Noble. The managers, the employees, the long-timers, all that sort of stuff, back when normal employees were allowed to talk to managers. We would talk about this all, and we all agreed that the way that a store will survive intense competition from online will be to remind customers of the things they can get at a brick-and-mortar Barnes & Noble that it can't get online. And that boils down to two things. One, immediacy. You see a book that you want, you don't have to wait. You can just walk out with it. You could read it that afternoon. And two, far more importantly, is connection with the staff. Where you go into a bookstore for the people who are working there, because they know you, they've come to know your tastes, they know a lot of what's in the store, they can make you recommendations that are far better than an Amazon recommendation algorithm could ever possibly be. And we experienced that. at that old Barnes & Noble, we experienced that all the time. I had it myself, just alone. I had a legion of customers who came in only to talk to me. And they would just wait. So sometimes it could get a little awkward. Because if I were at the information desk with, some new employee who didn't know me from a hole in the wall, and we'd both have a terminal. We'd each have a terminal to help a line of customers. And the idea was just, there used to be a line in those days at the information desk. I don't think that happens anymore. But there would be a line. The idea was just, whoever's open goes to the next person who's open, except that didn't happen. I heard quite a few times where there was a line that was formed of people who were saying, "No, I know you're open, but I came here to see Steve." And I wasn't the only one. There were plenty of other employees in their other areas who had the same thing. And of course, that's invaluable. And it can't be duplicated online. It is a strength that a store could live on. And as was touched on in this article, and as probably some of you already know from your personal experience, that has been touched on. That has been the lifeline by which independent bookstores have not only managed to hang on against the onslaught of store chains like Borders and Barnes & Noble, but also thrive. The independent bookstores are thriving now, and they're doing it largely because of that. They have the same ordering procedure as a giant retail bookstore, or Amazon for that matter. They have the same selection, or worse. No, they're thriving because they make personal connections with the community. Their booksellers are recognized as experts, as people who have knowledge of what they're doing. And that's allowed them to survive. And we all just assumed years ago that would allow Barnes & Noble to survive as well. It never crossed any of our minds that the company would do some of the things that its management had decided since to do. This firing of all of the most experienced employees and shuffling around of the ones who remain into places where they can't help customers is with books. The Barnes & Noble, the new Barnes & Noble the one that I actually ended up leaving, in the wake of that decision to fire all of its most experienced employees, took the few survivors and stuck them in the cafe, where they won't get a book question at all day long. Their expertise is wasted, completely wasted. They are there only because they played nice with management, and management wanted to keep them. As a body. as a body earning a certain amount that the computer, the invoicing computer, can work out to a weekly wage. But no accounting of the expertise that's wasted. Those people now who know all sorts of stuff about science fiction or mystery or horror or whatever are now never talking about books. They have a job, they have benefits, good for them, but the customer is completely shafted. A customer who goes into that Barnes & Noble now will not find me at the information desk. They will not find Deb at the information desk. Unless they're extremely lucky, the person they will find at that information desk when they have, let's say, a real book question to ask. Not something that you just have to type in, but a thing that requires you to know what you're talking about. Like, for instance, I just saw the news that the Man Booker long list is going to be announced soon, and that reminded me that I really liked a Man Booker winner. I think it was 2 years ago. It was about, and then they give a sketchy description of the plot. An 18-year-old who's never worked with books before and who's there only because they are $9 an hour, who's working with a computer that, of course, knows nothing except what it's programmed to know, is not going to be able to help that customer. That customer is going to walk up to that person, flail around. From what I've seen, the employees that are left have never been told to be nice to customers. So in addition to not being able to help the customer, there'll be unavoidable and very audible mockery in their uselessness. That customer will walk out without anything, and will be all the more inclined to do the very thing Barnes & Noble needs them not to do if Barnes & Noble is going to survive. They'll be all the more inclined to go online. Not only to find out a list of the Man Booker winners and runners-up for the last few years with plot descriptions to see what jogs their memory, much more time-consuming than if the clerk actually knew the answer, but still possible, but also to order the book instantly as soon as they find out what it is. The article that I read almost didn't mention any of this. They talked about the company's mistakes. The company, of course, took a bath on the Nook, the handheld Barnes & Noble electronic reader, a very good device in its first 2 or 3 or 4 generations, that the company sank an enormous amount of money into. Enormous amount. And not just in terms of buying and manufacturing and then distributing the device, but also in terms of totally revamping the front section of every store so that there was a massive Nook display area that I used to work at. When it had a traffic of customers, then I went there because that's where the customers were, even though I knew nothing about Nooks at the time. The company sank a huge amount of money into that because they had a Wunderkind manager who went in selling that. He went in pushing that. It was monorail, and the district manager for my store, the sort of the boss of the store manager, who's not in the store, they just visit from time to time. And the district manager at the time was a woman that I knew for 20 years, and that most of the time that I knew her was perfectly willing to talk with people, not just with managers. This was right at the end when I was sensing that was changing, and she was asking me, what do you think of all this? And I said, I think it's a great idea because it looks like more and more people are interested in e-readers, and of course they should be. And it's a fascinating way to find out what Barnes & Noble can and cannot do in the electronic book medium. But the way the company is doing it is absolutely insane. The way you do this is tentatively. You stick a toe in, you make a little booth, you get a few devices, you test the water to see if your customers are interested. You don't tear apart the whole front of the store or get rid of, I don't even know, 200 square feet of shelving in order to put in space with tables and fancy displays and LED screens for a device you don't know your customers want. You don't do that. That comes once you know they want it. You don't do that first. And she just rolled her eyes, and the company took a bath on it, just money that they can't get back. And also a bunch of other things that Barnes & Noble, a bunch of other attempts that Barnes & Noble has made to reach out to its customers. At least that's what the article called it. That all the experts who were interviewed just matter-of-factly assumed were doomed. That nothing can save Barnes & Noble. It's behind the times. No one is there. It will slowly shrink its store inventory, slowly pawn off money from the college division, or the cafes are still profitable. But that the idea of a chain of big retail bookstores just full of shelves and shelves and shelves of books, that idea is doomed. I don't know what that'll do to the many, many, many rural areas where the Barnes & Noble, this big, clean, well-lit, well-stocked bookstore is the only thing like it for hundreds of miles. I don't know what those communities will do. But one way or another, the prediction of this article was that all of that is going to happen soon. That Barnes & Noble is just going to fold on itself because it's failed to reach an audience. And the reason I bring all this up is because I'm curious. I'm curious to ask you about your own Barnes & Noble experiences. It's been a couple of years since I did that. I'd like to know, those of you in America, what do you think of when you think of Barnes & Noble? Do you go to your local Barnes & Noble regularly? One of the experts in this article repeated a complaint that many Barnes & Noble employees often complain about, which is that customers go in, they buy a coffee, they sit for a few hours, they look at new magazines, but they don't buy anything except the coffee, and then they leave with a mess of magazines behind that need to be resorted. Is that your own experience? Do you have a good crew at your Barnes & Noble? Some people that you go there have book conversations with and book recommendations? Yeah, Barnes & Noble is expensive. Retail books are expensive. New retail books are expensive. Is that a prohibitive factor for you? And is your local Barnes & Noble actually local? Or do you have to travel a long distance to get there? And or maybe your local Barnes & Noble has closed. I'd like to hear all of that. I read this article, I've read other articles like it, and I keep a watch on the future of this company. Of course, the prognosticators, even in this article, who say that the loss of Barnes & Noble will be a serious blow to American culture, are right. They aren't being boosters for a retail company. They're being boosters for the last man standing against the phenomenon of Amazon. So I'm going to stay interested in the subject until it resolves itself. But I don't quite trust an article that talks about all the reasons why Barnes & Noble will succeed or fail and never mentions customer service. So I want to ask you, well, what is the customer service like at your Barnes & Noble? Do you have stupid clerks? Have you lost experienced people? All that sort of stuff. I'd love to hear your Barnes & Noble stories. That was the only reason for this video. Just 'cause I read that article and it's been on my mind, wondering. I mean, I know that most of you are big fans of Book Depository, and I am too. It's adorably slow shipping, but it's a great selection, great prices. You don't pay for shipping. It's you just sort of you spend the money and then you forget about it, and months down the line the book appears. And I know that a lot of you probably shop at Amazon as well, but I'm curious to know what it is in America for physical in-store book buying. Is it Barnes & Noble? And is it pleasant if it's Barnes & Noble? And if it's not pleasant, is it not pleasant in the same way? I'm wondering if a lot of complaints are going to be the same in your answers. But that's the only reason I made this video, because it was on my mind, so I thought I'd natter on for a bit. Because I can't help but feel a small amount of vestigial loyalty to Barnes & Noble. Not so much to that glitzy sky and steel glass new store that we all moved to, where the managers were largely jerks and where the emphasis was clearly on the cafe. And you were a cog in a machine. The store manager for years and years actually said that until you're a manager, you're not a person, you're a cog. So you don't have any opinions, you don't have any right to complain, you can't ever get sick, you can't make a mistake without someone prissily walking up to you and matter-of-factly threatening your job. A person who makes mistakes all day long, just doing that because they're under the mantle of authority, in a way, in an abusive, a-hole-ish way, that the old stores, before the wave of superstore mentality, would never have dreamt of doing. Not in a million years would managers have dreamt of behaving that way. And when I saw that change, I automatically thought, well, okay, if this company fails, that will be the reason. And now I'm wondering. I'm wondering what the rest of you make. So you know where I stand. If I can find it, I'll remember to link the article to this video. But anyway. I've gone on too long. I'm going to wrap this up. But if you want to, feel free to tell me your Barnes & Noble stories, because that would be fascinating. And I will see you soon. Thank you.